In this video, I want to start breaking down the big differences between the establishment of our timing and the spacing. Each one of these is a core principle of animation that serves a very direct purpose. The timing creates the major story beats, and the spacing determines how fast and slow we transition between these story beats or these keyframes. Let's build a really quick animation to illustrate this point using some simple shapes, a cube right here in Blender. Now, I encourage you to follow along. I'm just going to be doing some very simple object level animation on my cube to illustrate the importance of, or to illustrate the difference between timing and spacing. We're going to have two cubes that have the exact same timing, but the spacing is going to be very different. Let's jump in and start exploring. I'm going to just fire off the good old move tool here, and I'm also going to activate my auto key system down at the bottom of my timeline just to make it a little bit easier for me to manage all this information. And simply put, I think what I'm going to do is that I'm going to have my cube, this is going to be the best animation ever, I'm going to have my cube go from the left side of the screen all the way to the right side of the screen. You bet, it's super complex, but an easy one to illustrate the differences between creating the timing and the spacing. All right, let's do it real fast. I'm going to lock in a keyframe just for all the location. We're just going to do location for both of these cubes. And there it is on frame 1. And let's just go forward to frame 60. And with the auto key system on, we'll just drag it over there and we'll automatically key that part for us. I'm going to hit the P key so I can interactively select a range of frames down in my timeline. I'm only going to cycle through those. And now let's see what we got. Yeah, a little too slow. So let's change the timing of it. Now I haven't changed the speed. I'm changing the location of the keyframe, which is going to create a different illusion. I'm going to zoom in on my timeline here a little bit here. At a frame of, or at a placement of 60, I'm going to change that keyframe maybe to, let's just put it a good 1 second. Let's see what that gives us. Yeah, I like that. That's a good sense of timing. Once again, I'm also going to just preview with the P key those ranges of frames just to make it a little bit easier for me to see and understand what I've established. What I've done just now is establish the overall timing of the animation. I haven't really started to experiment and explore how fast it's going to leave its starting point on the first part of the animation on the left side of the screen, and how fast or slow it's going to end its animation on the right side of the screen. This timing is relatively simple. It's relatively consistent. It's not entirely consistent because a quick examination of the function curve is going to show us a really interesting idea. And this is one of the things that I wanted to show you. Okay. Down here in my timeline, let's zoom in here a little bit. I'm going to do Control Tab, which is automatically going to swap from the dope sheet over into the graph editor. We saw this in the last video, or the last module, excuse me. And I'm going to start looking at X location. And here's what the graph looks like. If you look very carefully at the way the function curves are being drawn for this specific graph, you can see that it slowly ramps into its full speed. Then it's pretty consistent here. The slope of the function curve is pretty consistent. And then it ramps down. So think of it like this. The car is slowly starting. It gets to full speed right here. And then it slowly ends as it rounds out to that keyframe right in there. This is a pretty nice way to begin, and the computer is automatically going to add these ramps on either side of our keyframes for us, this easing. This is called the Bezier interpolation. Let me show you real fast. If I was to change the handle type to vector on both of these, there we go. Now we've created a linear animation. If you look at the curve now, the slope of the function curve, it's a straight line. Well, not a horizontal line or a vertical line, but the slope is very consistent as it goes from this keyframe to that keyframe. The angle doesn't change, so the speed doesn't change. Let's look at the animation now and see what it looks like. You'll probably discover quite instantaneously that it's going to feel like it just explodes off of its initial starting location, then slams into a keyframe, boof, right there, as if it hits the wall. This is a consistent animation, a linear animation. This is a good place to start our exploration of timing and spacing. Oftentimes, we want to have small changes in speed. Let's go ahead and create a duplicate of this entire object and its animation to give us a moment of comparison. So I'm going to duplicate this cube, Shift D, and I'm going to bring it down on the Z axis. I'm not going to change the structure of the animation. However, I will need to rekey some of this, on the duplicate. So cube 1 is going to be my duplicate. Let's bring it down to right about here on frame 1. And I'm just going, luckily the auto key system's in effect, it's going back to its original position because I haven't yet keyed its Z location on that second keyframe. So let's do, I'm going to copy it. And then I'm going to go to the next keyframe. Excuse me, not the next frame. There we go. I'm going to paste it in. That way it's all the way down there. Now we have two cubes that are identical to each other in their movement. If you look real carefully, oop, there we go. And actually, I think I have a rogue keyframe in there. I might have been on frame 1 or frame 2 for this guy. Let's see if we can find it real fast. Yep, actually, let's go into the dope sheet. Yep, there it is. There's the rogue keyframe accidentally placed on frame 4. Let's get rid of that guy real fast. Sometimes it's easiest to see the keyframes in the dope sheet. It even took me a second to figure out where it was. And now let's look at our animation. So the timing of both of these cubes is identical. It legitimately is a duplicate of each other, so they should be the same. What's cool about the idea of timing versus spacing is that the when they start and when they end are the same. What happens in between those moments, how fast they leave and how fast they end, is an exploration of the spacing. Let's check it out real fast. I'm going to work on this bottom cube, and now we're going to start to experiment and explore a little bit more directly with our spacing. This is where we absolutely can and should go into the graph editor and start really experimenting with different handle types, with different curves. The spacing is really, and I want to change my handle type to, let's just do free. That way I can go in, rotate these around here. I'm going to zoom in so you guys can see what I'm doing. Here's that first keyframe. Here's the handle. I'm just using the rotate tool. Now, if you have the keyframe selected here, it'll rotate both sides at the exact same time. This one's not doing it because it's on the opposite side of the start point there. But larger point being is that we can just use the rotate tool to change the slope. Let's do the same thing for this one over here. Just change the slope. I forgot to change its handle type from vector to, we can do aligned. That's a good one to kind of make sure that they're all uniformed up like that, which is pretty great. So now we've changed the timing. The structure and the location of all these keyframes has not changed. If we were to examine the result now, you're going to see that the timing is the same for both the cubes, but the spacing is different. Notice very carefully that they start and stop at the exact same time. But what they're doing in between that is an exploration of the spacing. Let's continue to push this idea very, very, very directly. I'm going to have this on the first keyframe on the bottom cube. Let's do this. Let's scale it up some. And let's really make it super slow down here at the bottom. Then it's going to get really fast, and then it's going to end as it did before. Let's play the animation again. See how it slowly ramps up and then catches up and gets fast and stops? They both start at the same time. They both end at the same time. The timing is the same. It's the spacing in between that gives it a good sense of life, detail, the illusion of life. That's what we're after. The cool thing about working with the spacing is it gives us an opportunity to explore. We're not changing the structure of the keyframes. We're just changing the graph. We're just changing the function curves. Let me show you another great example and another challenge that we're often going to work with when working in and around all these function curves in the graph editor. Okay, so here's my graph. Here's my curve. I scaled this first one quite significantly, and you can see that we can't scale it past a certain point because once we get to right about here, the curve doesn't change because that's because we're running into the influence of this handle type over here. So there is a relationship that we have to honor and follow between all of the keyframes. There are limits to the spacing itself. Now, oops, I apologize for deselecting. If you look very carefully now, look at the function curve. It slowly starts, then it's going to get lightning fast, and then it's slowly going to end. When the curves are horizontal, we're slowing the movement down. The change in value over time is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Now, if we were to look at the value and plot the values on our graph, we're going from maybe, 4 to 5 over 10 frames. So we're not changing that value, that position value, all too much. Let's zoom out and take a look at the final finished one here. Timing's the same. The spacing is what happens in between the keyframes. The timing, the structure of the keyframes is identical, but the illusion that we're creating based off of the spacing is wildly different, all thanks to the function curves in our graph editor. I think you're going to find that working with the spacing is you're going to give your characters and your animations just such much more detail, and this illusion of life and dynamism is going to skyrocket once we start exploring the spacing. It's going to remind our audience of gravity and make our animations more believable.